welcome to the bonus module. I'm calling, but what about my health? Health has become one of the most confusing issues for our body image journeys, and there's several reasons for that. First, there's so much information out there and available to us that the definition of what qualifies as healthy is constantly changing. And on the food and exercise front specifically, we've been on this roller coaster, following trends, following data and the new science, following the thought influencers, what they do, what they eat, how they're healthy. Woo! It's a never-ending ride. Second, we've been on this journey for so long, and we've heard so much data and so much information that we've been confused into believing that we have complete control over our health. Now, that might rub you the wrong way, even as you hear me say it. But we kind of believe that if we do all the things, or if we don't do all the things, and if we somehow end up unhealthy at the end of all of it, it's completely our fault. Like we had complete control by the nature of everything we did or didn't do. And the pressure of that, the weight of that is enormous. And so many of us wear that weight. Then to top it all off, we mesh ideas about health with ideas from scripture. And we tend to adopt a system that says if my health is suffering, it is something that I did to cause it, and it is reasonable and acceptable to make my life's purpose fixing it so I can stop the suffering. And we're going to dig into the scripture behind this and really explore what is true, whether or not we are over-focusing on improving our health, and whether or not it's biblical if we are. So in this lesson, I want us to explore all three of these aspects to our health journey, and food is a big part of that. I also want us to look at scripture. Towards the end, we're going to do that, and we're going to figure out what is the capital T truth around how we relate to our bodies versus the little t truth around what we believe health, our bodies, control, food, what was really going on there. So first, I really want to take you on a deep dive. This is going to be a history lesson of sorts, but I want you to kind of just like zoom out from your micro level, like looking at what am I going to have for lunch, zoom out from your life, and let's just go way back, zoom that lens way back, and let's look at what's happened over the past century around this concept of health. Now, Christy Harrison, she's an author. She's written a book called Anti-Diet. And she does a really good job in that book if you've not read it. She surveys the history of diets and where some of these concepts that we use pretty commonly come from. Just a couple side notes before I get into the history. She talks about how the man who invented the term morbid obesity was actually doing the first bariatric surgeries. So, of course, he coined a term that made it sound deadly to be obese because that's how he got customers. And we're going to go through several of those here over the next couple of minutes. But she talks about, and this part I think was just fascinating. She talks about where having a scale in your home came from. Now, like having a scale in our homes is pretty common, but in the early 1900s, it wasn't. And it wasn't actually until like 1925 in the United States that a lot of people had scales in their home. But before that, you didn't know how much you weighed unless you went to the doctor. And then kind of after that, the invention of the penny scale and carnival scales became a thing. But weight was not something that you monitored daily in your home. Now, 100 years ago, it may sound like kind of like a long time to you, but think about it. This means there are thousands of years of history where people did not live in bondage to a daily readout from a bathroom appliance. And I think the curious thing to explore here would be, what has this access to that information done for us in the health department? Are we healthier now than we were before? I mean, we live longer for sure, but I'd argue that we aren't living longer because our bodies are staying smaller because we're monitoring them so closely. The keep an eye on your weight to stay healthy line has been pushed on us for the last 40 or 50 years. If you look at the numbers across the board, it actually doesn't seem to be effective. Now, in the 1930s and 40s, we actually have to acknowledge the fact that like most women weren't trying to lose weight then. In fact, the cultural standard was a little bit plumper, a little bit fuller. So a lot of women who didn't have a lot of resources to eat as much as we eat today were trying to take weight gainers to achieve a fuller figure. Can you even imagine that? Dieting wasn't a thing yet. People were just trying to get enough food. They're trying to get creative about how they could get more nutrients and calories because, as you might remember, there were some wars going on, there were supply demands, and there was a lack of distribution chains. I mean, think about it. You didn't have access in the grocery store to every fruit and vegetable all year round, because the only way to get access to every fruit and vegetable all year round is to bring those fruits and vegetables in from all over the world. So back then, you only had what was in season and what was local, what could be packaged and shipped. That was your choices. But what's even more interesting to consider is that it wasn't until the early 1900s that people believed in any way, shape, or form that they had any kind of control over their health. You see, germs were invisible and people actually didn't even know about germs until Robert Koch, Louis Pasteur discovered bacteria in the late 1800s. But even then, it kind of took a while for people to kind of catch on to the concept, to the science that germs were spreadable and bacteria was passable, and maybe bacteria was behind some of the health issues that people were encountering. Beyond this, there's this whole concept of the perfect human body that really didn't start to come into play until around this time period, the 1930s, the 1940s, as culture became less fixated on the values that it used to esteem, like someone being a good citizen, someone being honest, someone being a good friend. Like those values started to diminish in terms of the way people treated each other and saw each other. And what rose instead was the rise of image. Think about Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, that came out in the late 1920s, I believe. And this kind of was on the cusp of a cultural shift where we were perceiving other people as valuable or attractive based on how they looked and presented themselves instead of based on character and virtue. Now, at the same time, this is where it gets a little yucky. Eugenics theory was coming about, and eugenics theory actually became eugenics law. And this was also the first time where governments started to kind of conflate these concepts of health and appearance. Before that, there was never this assumption that if you look healthy, you are healthy, or if you match a standard, a weight standard or an appearance standard, that actually means a health standard. But now, those two kind of concepts got jumbled. And soon, the ability to match someone's size with an assessment of someone's health was really just a hack. And it was a hack for whom? It was a hack for the life insurance industry, because now they could assess mortality risk based on this simple mathematical formula, which you may be familiar with, called the BMI. Whoo, the BMI. I know. You hear about the BMI at your doctor's office. You read about it in articles. It's vexing. But do you really know about it? So the BMI, the body mass index, was actually invented by a man named Adolf Quetelet. He's a Belgian mathematician between the years 1830 and 1850. Now, he never intended for the BMI to become any kind of index that would be used in the way that it's used right now. Instead, he was creating a hack just to help him in his own research. He's best known for trying to characterize the average man, which started as normal weight, or what average weight was for the men that he was studying, soon morphed into this concept of what the ideal weight would be for these men he was studying. And that concept of ideal weight first started to surface in 1959. Now, note, Quetelet was not a doctor. He wasn't a health expert of any kind. That wasn't even his motive. He was just making observations about mortality and criminology and white European men. But now we've taken his data, and it has been tweaked some over the years, but we've taken his data and we've made it say something very different than what it was actually trying to say. So the one thing important to note here is that yes, Quitlet created a hack, maybe had some usefulness for those life insurance companies. There's some loose correlations perhaps between size and mortality rates. But what that morphed into is an index that's used in schools and doctors' offices that doesn't just tell you how you compare in size to other people, it tells you how healthy you are. It was never intended to do that, and I actually still don't think it has that power. Now, many call the BMI chart racist because it only studied white European men. But almost 200 years ago, since those people Quitlet studied were born, as a human race, we've become more blended than ever. Like, I don't know if you've done genetic testing, but it's fascinating to find out how you're a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. But we are a lot more blended than we ever were before, and even than we were 200 years ago. And so the fact that Quitlet only studied Caucasian, mostly men, in the mid-1800s, it feels to me like we can easily say that the BMI chart is nowhere near comprehensive enough for us to use as any kind of metric for people in all different stages of life, from all different ethnicities, and then for women, right? Where does the BMI chart allow for changes in a woman's life? It doesn't. But yet, 50 years after the scale was invented, here's what happened. But yet, 50 years after the bathroom scale was invented, Americans finally had something to do with those bathroom scales, because insurance companies started putting out weight standards in the 50s, 60s, 70s. MetLife called it the ideal weight standards for women. And then eventually the BMI chart was adopted as the standard in the 1980s. And that allowed us all the privilege of trying to achieve our ideal weight. But why? So in 1998, that BMI chart that was adopted in the 80s, it got adjusted again, and the clinical guidelines actually shifted the metric of being overweight from 27.3, what it was in 1985, a BMI of 27.3 was considered overweight. It came down to 25 in 1998. Well, why did they do that? See, the BMI chart is a math formula, and I truly hope that you understand when you calculate your BMI, you are only calculating a number that was intended to be used to measure your size against the size of a group of European men in the mid-1800s. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of expect my body to be different than a group of European men from the mid-1800s. I mean, if you've ever visited historic Williamsburg or places like that, I'm constantly amazed at how people used to be shorter, it seemed. There were exceptions, but like the doorways were shorter and the beds were shorter and smaller. Now, because of our access to food, many of us are taller. As a culture, globally, people are taller than they used to be. So when I have women tell me that I'm not healthy because of my BMI, it makes me really sad, because I do understand that it feels like this one chart has a lot of power in our lives. And maybe you're trying to get insurance and that's a problem, or your doctor is pushing you to pay attention to the BMI. Like, I get it. It's coming at us from every single angle. But what if reality is there are many other ways to tell whether or not a person is healthy? And I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but what if reality is that there's actually a movement that wants to keep you focused on a math formula and a chart as your only metric of health, and their motive is financial gain? I don't know. I'm not going to spend too much time there, but that's just something for you to think about. Because I do sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I hope you'll stick with me. Like, I know this has been a long history lesson, friend, but I want you to see that these concepts, like health, like normal weight, like ideal weight, and even tracking your own weight, these are relatively new in the history of the world concepts. but we act like they're in the Bible. Okay? We just do. We act like there's a standard of health that we must adhere to in the New Testament. Like there's a BMI chart, like right after Hebrews. There's not. Trying to control your health was not a thing in the Bible days. So I hope you can see why maybe this is such a crazy, confusing issue for us to be caught up in today. Like today we have scientists and researchers studying our health as if it's a math formula that we can perfectly manipulate. The only problem is they keep finding new revelations and the new secret to longevity, and it keeps getting replaced over and over again. It's like, oh, I've got to do this. Oh no, it's not it anymore. I got to do this. Oh, that's not enough anymore. I got to do this. Oh. There's a Netflix series out right now in 2023. It's called The Secrets of the Blue Zone. And this researcher, he actually wrote a book on it. He goes to these different places where people live to be more than 100. And it's interesting. In many of these episodes, he's looking at their diet. He's looking at their exercise practices. He's looking at how long they keep working, which actually also keeps them moving, aka exercising. But he also points out through the documentary the importance of community. How these centenarians that live in blue zones like often live with family and spend a lot more time socializing. They're not put in nursing homes. They're not put in isolation. He talks about how they still go to church in these blue zones, or they still do things with the community to keep involved. He shows like a grand party that happens like every Friday night in this one Greek blue zone. He also shows like in Costa Rica, there's a blue zone where the people that are, over 90 and centenarians that are living there, they have lived on a diet of beans, squash, and corn at like every meal. Now, I'm watching this and I'm thinking, I thought corn was bad. I thought corn was going to kill me. Like, maybe it's not GMO corn. And I thought beans had too many leptins in them. And squash, that's fine. That's a vegetable. Like, where's the kale? Where's the spinach? Where's the leafy greens every day, right? And yet, they're living to be 100. And so, friend, I think he alludes to it a little bit through the documentary, but that's not how our culture treats longevity or health. Our culture talks about longevity and health as if it is completely dependent on your diet and exercise. But friend, health is not just about what you eat and how much you move. It's so much more than that. And yet, we spend a lot of time here trying to find the perfect diet or the perfect right workout for your lifestyle. We spend a lot of time trying to be healthy by avoiding certain foods. And I think that's hurting us. So let's talk about some specific examples of this and how many of us, myself included, we've followed the science, but potentially on an unhealthy journey with food. So I'm not going to go back too far. I'm going to just go back in my lifetime, things that I've witnessed. In the 1980s, Special K cereal, they advertised that we could eat cereal and not get fat. There was a Special K diet where you could replace 2 meals a day with a bowl of Special K and eat a healthy dinner, and you were supposed to lose weight after 14 days of doing that. And then in the 1990s, we were all low fat. So we were told, avoid fat. If you don't want to be fat, don't eat fat. So I would have never touched an avocado or guacamole, olive oil, and butter. Those things were sinful. I tried to cook without any fat. So I would use like chemical filled sprays, like spray butter. Some of you still have spray butter in your fridge. I know you do. But we would all do anything we could to avoid fat, to eat low fat. We ate plain bagels. We ate lots of plain carbs, like the Special K cereal. And we also ate some fat-free treats where the fat was largely replaced with sugar, but at least it didn't have fat in it. Oh, and then the 2000s came, and we decided that protein was king, right? You have to eat fewer carbs and more protein, and watch out for bananas because they have too much sugar in them, way too many carbs. We stopped counting calories in the 2000s, and we started counting macronutrients instead, which just, by the way, requires a whole lot more time and energy than just counting calories ever did. Eggs were questionable in terms of health benefits and were deemed possibly dangerous to one's cholesterol in the 1990s, but now it's the 2000s and eggs are back again because we need that simple, easy source of protein. Of course, the demonization of sugar has been a big part of our cultural health narrative too. And while arguably we eat more sugar now than ever before, there's also so many more messages telling us how bad it is than ever before. And that makes me think, well, why are there more people eating more sugar than ever before? And at the same time, I don't think you could stop someone on the street that would be like, oh, really? I didn't know sugar wasn't great for me. It's almost as if making it a forbidden fruit is making it taste sweeter, is making us want it more. I don't know, just throwing that out there. By the 2010s, everyone was doing the South Beach diet, or then it was called the ketogenic or keto diet, where fat then became the king. Okay, so we had carbs were king, and then protein was king, and now fat is king. And although I had learned quite well through the 1990s how not to eat fat and that I was supposed to avoid fat, now it's 2012 and I'm supposed to be trying to make fat bombs so I can reach my fat goal every day. You've been there, maybe. A couple more here. By 2012-2013, a BBC documentary by British telejournalist, it purported a theory that you could get thin and live longer through a concept called intermittent fasting. And by 2019, it was such a trend here in the United States that companies started making products to help you fast better, help you break your fast better. And then, of course, a California study came out not too long ago. I researched it for my 40-day body image book, so all the data and citations are there. But this man was a religious intermittent faster. I mean, he had done it for 7 years and was running this big study at a big California university to prove how effective it was. And you know what he found? He found it didn't make any difference. People ate the same foods on this study for the same period of time, weeks-wise, but he let one group eat it any time of the day and he had one group do IF. And guess what? Their results were the exact same. Friend, that is just a recent history of dieting. Like back in the early 1900s, there was a diet. This was a legit thing called the anti-swamps diet. And I did say swamps, SWAMPS diet, because some author noticed that people who lived near swamps tended to be fatter than those who didn't. And so move away from the swamp, lose weight. I mean, that sounds ridiculous to us now. But I wonder how many anti-swamp diets we're falling for every year. I mean, it just takes one influencer losing weight, toning their body, and then they get a few other influencers to do it too. And thanks to TikTok and Instagram, we all know about it. And if it worked for them, maybe it'll work for me, and I've got to try it. And yes, some of these trends are based in studies. There are huge benefits to epileptic children who follow a ketogenic diet. Some bodies feel better on fewer carbs. Some feel better when eating carbs, though, too. And the problem is these food rules have become like religious laws to us. In the name of health, we pursue these trends vigorously. In the name of health, we don't eat bread, or we don't eat avocados, or we don't eat breakfast because we're trying to be healthier. But does anyone else feel jerked around? Like when I was a kid, I was told that breakfast was the most important meal of the day. Eat it to be healthy. And now it's trendy to skip it to be healthy. What? And that brings me to last week. Yes, last week, I got an email from a health influencer that I follow. He's a researcher. And you know what he said? He said maybe he was wrong about carbs. Low fat might be the way to go. Yes. I fell backwards into 1987. Low fat is coming back. Mark my words. Tracy Brown, a dietitian friend of mine, she and I did an episode of the podcast a while ago, and it was called The Fear of Bread. So you can look for it. It's the Fear of Bread episode. But Tracy talked about this reality that there's only 3 macronutrients, right? Carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And each one takes a turn kind of being the king of the hill, while another one takes a turn being demonized. But the problem is our bodies were designed to need all 3 macronutrients. So whichever one you deprive your body of, that eventually is going to catch up to your body, and that's the only one your body's going to want. If you've ever tried to be keto, you understand this, right? All you wanted was carbohydrates at some point. And maybe you made it 6 weeks, maybe you made it a year, maybe you didn't make it 6 minutes, but at some point your body was like, we need carbs. You went back to those carbs again. And that wasn't about willpower. That was about how God designed your body to run. That was physiology, not psychology. And what I think is funny, so it's 2023 as I'm recording this. What I think is funny is I am watching the rise of biscuits, and it makes me laugh. I've noticed these biscuit places showing up where people can just go and buy biscuits. Well, 10 years ago, in the heat of paleo and keto, no one was going to go to a store and buy biscuits. No one was buying bread. But now that we're moving past that and carbs are back to being king, or on their way back to being king, biscuits taste good. Let's go for it. This is no accident, friend. We're on a Ferris wheel. Keep going round and round and round. My goal here in this bonus unit of the course is for you to see behind the curtain. You know, the scene from The Wizard of Oz where he says, "Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain." And he says it loud into the microphone so he sounds big and ominous. But Dorothy sees is just this old guy standing there with the microphone. It's kind of what these messages about health and diet have been for us. We need to look behind the curtain. We have to ask ourselves, where are we getting our information about what food is healthy and what food is not healthy? Are the sources that we're getting our information from motivated by anything, right? Like, let's just talk legitimately about bias, right? If a company has a lot of stake in low carb foods, they're going to put a lot of money into diet plans and health research around low carb living, and so on and so forth. Friend, if you are following our culture's health trends, you are following a moving target. And I don't know, maybe it feels like it hasn't been a moving target. Maybe you've just kind of bought it so much that it's hard to see it. But friend, I really pray today that you can see it. I pray that you can see maybe a pattern in your own life where you were doing this thing and cutting out this thing and trying to do this thing. And then you were doing this thing and cutting out this thing and adding this thing and trying. I think many of us have been on this roller coaster. And it's just like beauty, right? Like one day, no one wants a butt. In the 1990s, everyone's trying to work their butt off so they can have a skinny flat butt to have that heroin chic thin look. And now everyone wants a butt, and girls are complaining that they'll never have a fuller butt. I mean, I never thought I'd hear the day, right? It's the same with food. One decade, you're avoiding olive oil, and a few decades later, you're avoiding the bread that you wish you could dip in that olive oil now that it's legal to eat. Even the food pyramid, friends. Maybe you learned the food pyramid in school, but even that has changed over the years to match the trends. And there's some interesting data around like why it took so long to put the food pyramid out in the first place, and all the lobbying groups in Washington that had a big voice in influencing, like, no matter what the data said, as the government tried to analyze the data and create these guidelines for us, these lobbying groups had a huge voice in that. So again, I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist here. I just want you to start asking some questions. I just want you to think carefully about these health principles that perhaps you've just accepted as capital T truth when really they're little t truth. What we know about food from science is not gospel truth. It's always subject to change. And it is always changing, always has changed, and will continue to change throughout the course of our lives. The bigger question is this healthy for our bodies? is following all these food trends, going from this thing to that thing, restricting this, now restricting that. Is that good for our bodies? And I think the short answer is no. God made our bodies to need all 3 macronutrients. God gave each type of nutrient a special role in how our bodies function. So when you remove one of those nutrients from the equation, okay, yeah, maybe the result is weight loss, but what's the other impact? What's it doing to those other parts of your body that once relied on that nutrient to function the way God made them to function? Now, if your end game is just being thin, okay, try it. It might work. But most of us say that we're doing this to be healthy, not just to be thin. And I mean, unless you have food allergies, there's some exceptions to this. But for most of us, being healthy requires us to eat foods from all 3 macronutrient groups. So let me give you some more fodder as to why I believe this way of eating and following the patterns of restriction and dieting rules of the day is unhealthy. One word: bananas. Okay, so in my low carb, low sugar days, I avoided them like the plague. Eventually, I found out that maybe I had some sort of sensitivity to bananas, which made me avoid them even more. Like I would make a smoothie for my kids and put bananas in it, and then I'd have to make a separate smoothie for myself that was banana free. Now, I would eat any kind of packaged protein bar that had low sugar and lots of protein. Like anything in a package that said it was healthy, I'd probably eat that. Wasn't scared of that. But bananas? They were kind of scary. And then yesterday I was reading an article about how bananas are nature's perfect antidepressant. What? And the woman who was writing it, it was like her banana testimony of how eating a daily banana for her has worked better than her anti-anxiety meds. So she carries one with her everywhere she goes. And friends, this just kind of made me mad because I thought about how many women now rely on antidepressants, need anti-anxiety meds. And I had the thought, I'm like, is the rise in the need for these medications? I mean, yes, we've had a stressful couple of years. But is it because we're just not eating enough bananas because they've got high carbs and are too high of sugar and we've been told bananas are bad? Like, when it comes to things like that, I get really mad. I get really frustrated. Like, why are we demonizing foods that God made that are good for our bodies and can help our bodies, maybe even in these really unique ways, like bananas treating depression and anxiety? Who knew? And instead, we're convinced to buy something more expensive, right? Because I don't know about you, but I can get bananas for like $1.39 a pound. And that's about what I pay for one of my bars. Is it healthier to follow what everyone's telling me? Again, this isn't medical advice, but my question for us all is, are these ways we've restricted food making us healthier? Or has following these fickle, arbitrary, man-made, and I'm going to even say corporate-made food rules actually made us all less healthy? Let me add a side note here about exercise. So aerobic exercise was actually invented in the late 1970s, started to catch on in the early 1980s. But before that, people didn't really do cardio. Weightlifters and bodybuilders went to the gyms, but regular people, for the most part, did not. And culture keeps pushing for us to exercise more, exercise more, exercise more. That our weight problem is that we don't eat right and we don't exercise enough. But as I look at culture from a historical perspective, it feels like people do aerobic or cardio exercise. I mean, I'm generalizing here, but it feels like there's a lot more people doing that. There's a lot more people that belong to gyms than ever before in history. And I don't think there's anyone out there, at least in this country, who's like, oh, I should exercise? I never thought about that. Instead, most people are like, I need to be doing more hard cardio. I'm not doing enough hard cardio. And yet, what if all this hard cardio is actually unhealthy for us too? And I'm not saying that exercise is unhealthy. Like we sit a lot, but cardio that exhausts us can cause a stress response in our body. It actually increases our cortisol levels. So if you're stressed out and you want to go for a hard run to relieve your stress, yeah, you are going to get an endorphin rush that might help you feel like you've put a buzz on top of your stress perhaps. But what's actually happening in your body is you're stressing it out even more. Remember, no matter what they say, sugar isn't the number one cause of disease. Food isn't the number one cause of disease. Stress is the number one contributor to disease. Stress is what increases our blood pressure. Stress is what leads to many chronic conditions. Stress is connected to everything. But instead of trying to stress less, how many of us are stressing even more because we feel like we're not eating the right things and we're not exercising the right ways? Are our attempts to be healthy actually stressing us out and making us less healthy? Friend, our health is just so much more than what we eat, how much we exercise. In fact, our own government says, the government tells us we need to eat better and exercise more to be healthy, but our own government qualifies 5 social determinants of health. These are access and quality to healthcare, education access and quality, our social and community context, our economic stability, and our neighborhood or living environment. Beyond this, when it comes to an individual's health, it's not just food and exercise that determine whether or not you'll get a disease or live a long life. It's so much more than that. Many who study this believe food and exercise play a much smaller part than we've been led to believe in our health classes. The study of epigenetics is fairly new, and that looks at our DNA and how our genetics have been influenced and really shaped by generations past. Friend, you have no control over your DNA. You have no control over your genes, and yet they may play a much larger role in how healthy you are or whether or not you will ever get a disease or how long you'll live than anything you ever put in your mouth. Genetic differences, get this, friends, genetic differences account for 75% BMI variability. Likewise, not everyone responds the same way to food restriction and exercise. I did a podcast episode on exercise non-responders, and this data shows that up to 1/5 of people who follow the same diet and do the same exercise plans will not see the same results show up in their body. Now, they won't look like everyone else at the end of the 8-week boot camp. And it's not because they didn't work as hard or didn't do the same moves or ate the wrong things when they went home. And in fact, the exercise probably will make them healthier cardiovascularly, give them greater endurance, maybe make them stronger muscularly. But their bodies just aren't going to change to look like everyone else's. They're not going to get the dream body. They're not going to lose the same amount of weight like the other participants in the program. This is genetics, my friend. You do not have complete control over your health or over your body size. Similarly, your beliefs play a role in your health. Did you know that people who are optimistic and have a positive attitude about life live longer than people who don't? This is a Harvard study. It shows you have a reduced risk of heart disease, stroke, and lung function simply by being optimistic. I mean, this causes me to question the overemphasis on food so much more. I work with so many women who are afraid if they eat ice cream, they'll get cancer or diabetes. But what if the ice cream doesn't matter? What if it's just about reducing stress and having a great mental outlook? What if eating the ice cream actually helps you reduce stress and have a great mental outlook? Oh, I know. Sometimes when I'm eating ice cream, I feel much more positive about the world and my life. I think of my grandfather, who lived to 1 month shy of his 99th birthday, eating Wonder Bread with peanut butter and a glass of full-fat milk every single night before bed. He drank Yahoo chocolate sodas. He ate these things called moon pies. He ate full-fat ice cream, never touched a frozen yogurt. I don't think I ever saw him eat a salad. And he died of natural causes. Is it really just about the food? I'm showering you with lots of data today because I truly want to challenge you to think beyond the culture's narrative when it comes to your health. And in some cases, you may have to think beyond your church's definition of health too. Taking care of your temple, treating your body well, trying to be fit to serve God, and trying to be healthy to do God's purposes is not about how much you weigh. If you want to be healthier, engage in healthy habits, but recognize that healthy habits may never change the scale for you. And I think what happens too often is we rely so much on that scale to tell us whether or not we're getting healthier, that if the scale doesn't tell us we're getting healthier, we just completely abandon the healthy habits. We're like, well, why bother if I'm not going to lose weight? Why bother? Also, understand, friend, that if your healthy habits require you to restrict calories, restrict food groups, or exercise too much, these actually may be unhealthy habits, even if you are losing weight. If you're ignoring your God-given hunger cues, if you're afraid of certain foods that you aren't allergic to, if you're afraid to eat too much, if you're obsessing over gluttony, and I did a two-part podcast series on that, so go check that out. If you're exercising off everything you eat, like these are signs of disordered eating, not health. Also, if any food plan you're on causes you to lose your hair, your sex drive, or feel cold all the time, or doesn't allow you to exercise because the caloric limits are so low, you're not getting healthier. It's making you sick. From personal experience, I have to share that all of my restrictive eating eventually led to thyroid issues that I'll have for the rest of my life. Every time you restrict calories, it hurts your thyroid. Mine only put up with it for 25 years. Then it said, okay, you're done, Heather. And I often work with women of similar thyroid issues to mine because of a lifetime of restriction. Plus, added stress or trauma often leads these women to go down the other course I went down, which is autoimmune disease. Additionally, all of my exercising and over-exercising, trying to be healthy, led me to some degree of adrenal burnout. I have adrenal regulation issues, and those put even more stress on my thyroid and my whole metabolic system. Intermittent fasting principles taught me to really test the range of my blood sugar, and that really messed with my hormones too. Because see, there's nothing less healthy for your blood sugar than to go without eating for a long time. To regulate blood sugar, you need to eat regularly. And so that deprivation really taxed out my blood sugar too. Sure, fasting is biblical, and I actually believe that when you are fasting for biblical purposes, there's some sort of special protection that happens in your health, right? But intermittent fasting isn't a biblical fast. When you're restricting food for the purpose of getting skinnier, I don't think the special protections apply, and we end up taxing out systems of our body that were meant to last our whole lives. So many of you might be wondering now, okay, well then what do I do, Heather? How do I eat? What do I do? I'm not going to give you a diet plan, you know that, but let me just give you some overall guidance. First, God made your body to be satisfied and nourished by food. Yes, your ultimate satisfaction is in Him alone, but that doesn't mean that food can't satisfy you. Whoever the acidic monk was that decided food shouldn't taste good, or that pleasure was bad and pleasure was sinful, like none of that's in the Bible, my friend. That's garbage. God is going to throw us a feast when we get to heaven. We won't have to eat then. Our new heavenly bodies will not require food, so we will not be eating for nourishment. And I don't think He's going to serve rice cakes, plain kale, right? I think He's going to serve us foods that will taste good, that will bring pleasure, that will enjoy eating, right? Because food is a gift. It's a good gift from God. And to not enjoy that food, what's the scripture? Whatever you do, eating or drinking, like do it all to the glory of God. I don't know about you, but I don't really feel like celebrating God's goodness when I'm eating a plain rice cake. So a couple other guidelines here. If it's made in a lab specifically for you to lose weight, it's not food. It's not in the category of food. You're not eating food then. Also, if you're afraid of food, you're missing out on something. It's something God gave us, like I said, to be a gift. It's a blessing. Are there good foods and bad foods? I think we have to stop using that morality language around food that culture uses and recognize that God said that all foods were clean, right? God doesn't have a list of good foods and bad foods. That's a man-made rule, not a God-made rule. In fact, the New Testament says it's not what goes into a man's mouth that defiles him. It's actually Jesus that says it. It's not what goes in your mouth that defiles you. You are free to eat whatever you want. Now, that said, there are some foods that are going to nourish you better and they're going to feel better in your body. But if you come from an eating disorder background or disordered eating background, I highly recommend that you get help on this front. Because I think the best thing for you to do is for you to let the pendulum swing the entire other way. Go to an all foods fit approach and just be free to try and eat whatever you feel like you want to eat. And again, if that's too hard, if that's too difficult, if that's impossible, you likely have some level of eating disorder or disordered eating that you might need additional help for. Please reach out. I can connect you with someone who can help. But if you're like, hey, you know what? I'm ready to try it. Then hear me when I say, let the pendulum swing. And then after a season, start to think about your food again in terms of what makes me feel good. What do I enjoy eating? What do I like? A lot of us don't even know what we even like to eat because we followed so many food rules for so long. It's like, I don't even know what I prefer. I just only know what I'm allowed to eat, what I can eat and can't eat. Give yourself the freedom. And then you can scale back to make decisions of what nourishes your body the best. Okay, we've covered a ton of ground today already, but I do want to loop back and address that third point I promised I would cover in the theses, the 3 theses I had at the beginning. This obsession with food, this obsession with health, is it biblical? Is there biblical justification for stressing over every piece of food we put in our mouth? Should we be feeling like we're not taking good care of our temples if we miss a workout? Like, you likely already know that my answer to these questions is no. It's not a very biblical way to live, but I want to flesh that out for you even more. John 12:25 says this: whoever loves his life loses it, and whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Hating your life? I mean, the concept here obviously isn't that you turn into Eeyore, I hate my life. Instead, it's that you are so kingdom focused. Remember, we talked about that in some of the earlier sessions. You literally hate your life as compared to the life that you have ahead and how much greater it is to follow Jesus and what he has planned for you than it is to follow what you have planned for you. You can look at this world in light of eternity. You are excited about what he has in store. And so this life, yeah, okay, there's some good things, but yawn, what's next is better. I was recently on a podcast interview with someone and she asked me the question, why are we so focused on optimal health anyway? Like, life is going to be so much better in heaven. And I thought it was a really great question because I know so many people that are trying their hardest to live their longest and best lives here. And again, that's not to say that we trash our bodies like a hotel room we're going to check out of tomorrow. Like, no, I'm not saying that at all. But you can care for your body without obsessing over it. You can care for your body in such a way where you are stewarding it well, without it consuming every minute of mental mind space. Let's look at Mark 8, another passage here. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Tim Keller teaches on this very confusing passage, and it's so good. It's something I never understood before. I didn't really get why Jesus all of a sudden went kind of ballistic on Peter, like, get behind me, Satan. Like, that's a little extreme. Like, why did he react so vigorously to this? But Keller talks about the importance of Jesus' reaction, shows us how Peter had a this world, this economy mindset. Peter was believing that what's most important in this world is to not suffer. Peter was believing that if you do good, you won't suffer. Peter was believing that because Jesus was good, there's no way he would suffer. Peter was believing all of these lies of our culture, these lies of our world, right? And this is going to be kind of tough to say, right? But these lies, this you won't suffer, you don't have to suffer, it's demonic. Oh, yikes. I did a whole series on spiritual warfare. You can check that out, right? But these messages aren't of God. They're of this world, and the prince of this world is Satan. It's a demonic message that you don't have to suffer. And so Jesus doesn't say, no, Peter, you have bad theology. You need to have better theology. He calls out the demonic influence. He says, get behind me, Satan. Because this is not God's perspective that you are speaking, Peter. This is this perspective of Satan. Yikes. So let me read to you what follows next, though. And this I think maybe ties it all together in a way I never noticed before. This is verse 34 from Mark 8. Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? What good is it for you to be physically healthy, but not spiritually healthy or mentally healthy? There's a verse on that too, 1 Timothy 4:8. You can check that out. Friend, I feel like so many of the messages, even in church, are so over-focused on us being healthy to serve Jesus that they forget the serving Jesus part. In Module 12, we're going to talk more about this. But if your fitness goals, your diet plans, your food plans, if any of those things that you have in place, maybe you call them your boundaries, maybe you just call them your life, if any of these things you have in place prevent you from loving others well, you are missing your main objective in life. If your goal is to avoid suffering in your health, and you're putting everything else out of the way aside so you can meet that one goal, I wonder if that's the right thing to live for. Like, what if taking up your cross to follow Jesus means laying down your desire to have a body that weighs a certain amount or looks a certain way? And what if you have to lay that down to love others better? Okay, real life here. My marriage got better when I stopped dieting. It truly did. I'd even say that my relationship with my children got better because I no longer segregated from them at mealtime. Like, I was no longer angry at them for eating the last treat that I had bought for myself and planned on like splurging on at a particular time, and they ate it. Like, that scenario didn't happen anymore. I was no longer the food police for everyone in every household. I was no longer the food police for everyone in my household. I was no longer the food police for everyone in my household. Food went from being something antagonistic and strife-filled in our family to something that was just nourishing and fun. We could enjoy food, meal times, eating, celebrating together. Now, my body did look different when I was restricting food and made exercise my number one priority. And as I reminisce, sometimes I think I miss that body. I'm tempted to believe that if I had that body now, I would be happier. I'm lured by that idol to think that I could just go back to my old ways. I don't know, maybe for a couple weeks, a couple months, and I could get that old body back. And then I could bring that old body into my new lifestyle. And it would be the best of both worlds. And I would be happy and free and everything would be wonderful. But that would not be laying down my own life. That would be pursuing my own interests for the sake of me. I crossed the line from caring for my health to obsessing over and prioritizing my health so quickly, so easily. And again, I don't actually think this is health. I don't think any of that is health. If you've ever done Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, he uses an illustration towards the end of the course where he sets himself up as the fund manager for God's money. He talks about how it's really all God's money, and God has just made each of us his fund managers. I think the same kind of concept can apply to our bodies. Like our bodies are God's. He made them. But we're managing them while we're here on this earth. So what does he ask of us as a manager? Well, he asks that we use them to worship him, that we use them to serve him. Does God ask that we do everything we can to try to make our bodies look as good as we can? I don't see that anywhere in the Bible. The fund manager who stays up all night long, every night, obsessing over what the accounts are doing, watching the scale, if you will, is not actually stewarding his money in a healthy way. Does he ask that we do everything we can to pursue optimal health? I don't see that either. It feels a bit like the story of the talents. Instead of using our talents, right, using whatever we have left, we're hiding them behind this objective of keeping them safe. In the story, the parable of the talents, the man who hid his talent so he wouldn't lose it was called a wicked servant. Those who invested and grew their talents were told, "Well done." What are you doing with your body? Are you spending so much time trying to protect it from disease that you're not using it? Yes, I acknowledge some of you have real health conditions, real health concerns. Are there things you can do to manage your condition, and should you do them? Absolutely. But should it be your number one concern? I don't know. I mean, if you're in chronic pain, maybe it takes up a lot of mental space, and maybe that's all you can do. That's all you can handle. I hear that. I understand that. There's so much grace for that. But if it's not, if you're still mostly able-bodied around this condition, oh, friend, don't let it monopolize your life. God has other things for you to do. He has a good purpose, a call, plan on your life to do things beyond just making sure that you never have a stroke or just making sure that you never get diabetes, which, friend, by the way, there's nothing you can do to guarantee either of those things. So how do I be healthy? Well, let me just leave you with some really practical tips here. To be healthy, you create healthy habits that are about more than food and exercise. You focus on adding things to your diet instead of restricting or eliminating things from your diet. So here's some examples. Try adding 2 servings of vegetables a day. This is something that I've tried to do, right? Like, okay, I'm eating the way I feel like I want to eat every day. I'm intuitively eating. You can learn more about that on my website, and I've got some great resources I can direct you to for intuitive eating help. But I'm eating intuitively, but I'm trying to be like, okay, could I add an extra carrot here? Could I add some spinach to this thing I'm making? 2 extra servings of veggies a day. Add 15 minutes of prayer and meditation on scripture every day. Ooh, that might be harder than the vegetables thing, huh? What would it look like to shut down your phone for 15 minutes? And think about a passage of scripture and pray and just ask God to help you. Ask him to be with you. Ask him to touch all your fears and concerns around your food, around your health, around your body. That, my friend, will make a bigger difference than any weight loss ever could. Add a de-stress wind down routine before bedtime. Bath, maybe calming music, or maybe just 10 minutes without a screen to relax. Stress is your enemy. I go to my doctor is more of a functional kind of medicine doctor. And every time I go, she's like, what are you doing to manage your stress? Stress is your enemy. And she's so spot on. What are you doing to manage your stress? Can you add a walk or more time in nature? You know, I was a gym rat for a long time. I worked in gyms. I really felt like the only exercise that was real exercise was exercise that took place in a gym. And now I've become a walker. Friend, walking is wonderful. No, it's not the same cardio buzz that you get from a HIIT class or from a spin class. But there is something to being out in nature that has other health benefits beyond just the exercise you're getting. If you're walking, you can run too. But if you don't run, if you hate running, if you wouldn't run unless you're being chased by a bear, walking is great exercise and just a great way to de-stress and feel God's presence with you. Can you add more water? Can you add more time with friends? Can you add more family time that doesn't involve a screen? Oh, that's challenging. Family game nights are sometimes rough, especially with kids that are used to staring at screens. But that's healthy. Watch that Blue Zone documentary. What's good for us is to be with other people, laughing and enjoying each other and talking, dancing, having fun. That's healthy. Can you add more community to your mealtime? Are you always eating lunch alone at your desk or maybe alone at home? What coworker can you ask to go to lunch with you? Or maybe if you pack your lunch, just ask a coworker if she wants to sit in the break room and talk. Don't eat alone. Make that a community time, and that will bring so much more. Actually, there's even science behind what happens to us when we're less stressed. We digest our food better. We get more nutrients out of our food. So eating in community can actually help you be healthier even with the food you're consuming. Nutrition is not managed at the micro level we try to manage it at. In fact, we feel like, oh, one cookie and I've blown it. But that's the danger of the diet mentality, the diet mindset. In fact, I think it's kind of part of the pure evil of that because there's no grace in that approach. It's law only. Follow the law or you're condemned forever. Most of us think we're motivated by shame, but we're really not. Shame just makes us more ashamed. So we do what every person eating out of shame does. We just eat more. You may not even be an overeater, but you may still be overcome with shame around food. Friend, this is not what God has for you. There's a healthier way to relate to food. There's a healthier way to relate to your body. And there's a way to define health that doesn't require you to be following these strict plans or require you to feel guilty if you don't get 45 minutes in on the treadmill. This has been a lot of information today. I truly hope it's been helpful. Please reach out or bring your questions to group if you're still meeting in your groups this week. And I can't wait to discuss it with you further.